Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Here today we are going to cover next topic of Unit 4, that is motherboard and its components. As in previous class, we have discussed the Unit 4 start with the computer casing, that how many types of casing are there for the system unit to be enclosed in, that was store casing and desktop casing. So after the casing, we have started our next topic of exploring the inside of system unit. Inside system unit, we have found two main components, that were power supply and motherboard. As we have ended up in last lecture with the power supply, so today we are starting motherboard and its components in a working computer system. So how we will define the motherboard? What is motherboard? Motherboard is actually the printed circuit board, and it's the foundation for a computer, over which all the computer peripherals, internal components are attached, over which the data, signals, addresses travels. It also allocates the power and allows the communication to and between the processor, RAM, and all the other computer hardware components which are attached over it. Here, in this image, you can see all the internal components of the motherboard, which are electrically present inside the computer circuit board. This is the main circuit board, main backbone of your computer system, over which all the peripherals, internal connections, and all the internal components of motherboard are present. So, how many components are there inside the motherboard? Inside a motherboard, we have many different types of components. There are many types of slots, different types of slots, slots for memory, slots for expansion cards. We have integrated graphic cards, Pci slots, P-pin, gas-pin connectors, power connectors, inductors, capacitors, CPU sockets. These are different types of components that are present inside the system motherboard. Here you can also see there are three different types of connectors, slots, processor socket, memory slots, bridges, IDE. These are different internal required components for the computer to work on. The first, motherboard. History says that the first motherboard is considered to be the one used in IBM personal computers that were released in 1981. At that time, IBM called this component as a planner instead of the motherboard. How many components are there in our text for a motherboard? Our book lists these components 10 in number. These are BIOS, expansion slots, ribbon cable, IDE cable, SATA, FT, memory cable slots, disk controllers, cooling system, and computer bus. In today's class, we will cover the first three. So let's start. BIOS. What is this BIOS? BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System. These are actually firmware in nature. BIOS is firmware in its nature. Because it's a fixed chip, that usually has small programs that controls the internal electronic devices of computer. And this BIOS is the first program that computer reads or executes when the computer is switched on. Means the booting process of computer system in which it checks and analyzes the system devices is executed when we just switch on our computer system. Before we get the desktop of our operating system, all the instructions that are executed over computer, that is BIOS. That is under the instruction of BIOS. So it means BIOS is actually a combination of hardware and software. So when we start the BIOS, when we start up our computer, this is the BIOS, which starts our computer. And its main function is to load and start the operating system. First job of BIOS is to check and initialize the system devices. And these devices are video cards, keyboards, mouse, hard disk, and other peripheral devices, whether they are working or not. If found working, then BIOS loads operating system from the hard disk to memory. After loading and execution of BIOS, the control is given to system. This all process is known as the booting or booting system of your computer system. Under BIOS, what happens? Under BIOS, actually, hardware configuration is checked. It sets the system clock, enable and disable the system components, selects the bootable devices sequence, and sets the password for system and user login. These are all different configurations that we can do in BIOS setting. After the BIOS, next component of the motherboard are the ports. What are these ports? Ports are actually the interfaces, internal interfaces between the computer and other computer peripheral devices, peripherals. And these common ports include the serial port, parallel port, VGA, USB, Ethernet LAN port, audio ports. These are present inside the motherboard and outside the motherboard, on which different peripheral devices are connected. Here in this image, you can see there are different types of ports which are present at the rear side, back side of your system unit, on which we connect different types of peripheral devices. We will discuss in more detail in the next topic of this unit about the ports and their types and their working. But at the spot, ports are the internal and external interfaces on which the hardware or the peripheral devices are connected with the computer system. So these are external interfaces. Then comes the expansion slots. Expansion slots, also known as bus slots. And these are also the interfaces which gives the platform to connect the different types of cards over the motherboard. Expansion slot is the connection of the port inside the motherboard. Means inside computer over the motherboard, there are different types of slots on which we can attach the peripheral devices, cards, or memory cards. And it provides an installation point for the hardware expansion card to be connected. It means slots are internal interfaces and ports are external interfaces. External interfaces gives the connection point to connect the devices externally with the computer system unit, and slots give the internal connection points. These are the internal connection points. So slots, which are expansion slots, which expands the capability of the computer, which enhances the functionality or capability of the computer system and gives the internal interfaces. These are three in number: PCI, PCIe for express, and edge. Here comes PCI slots, which are most common form of internal expansion for the system. PCI stands for what? PCI stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect. These are the computer buses or electrical channel for attaching the hardware device in the computer. These devices can be ICs fitted into main board or an expansion card that fits into a slot. These slots are PCI cards used in computers to enhance the computer's capability to connect over the internet or networks. These may be sound cards connections, modems, extra ports like USBs or serial ports, TV tuner cards, and disk controllers. PCI is still in use in some computers, but it is superseded with PCIe slot. E stands for express, and these are the best type of expansion slots to have in PCs. It is also written as the PCIe. Without in more detail, the express type of expansion slot communicates motherboard and therefore with the processor both quickly and efficiently. PCIe and PCI both actually gives the standard way to connect different type of peripheral devices. And this is the standard developed by Intel, Dell, IBM, and HP in 2004 to replace the old PCI and AGP standards. PCIe Express, that is the next version of PCIe, which actually preserves the capability of PCI, and it has many improvements over the conventional PCI, which includes more bandwidth, whereas bandwidth between the difference between these two can be calculated, like PCI has the bandwidth of 133 MBs and AGP has 2100 MBs. So the maximum system was throughput, good error detection and reporting mechanism, and hot plugging. These are the features which are included in PCIe. And it's the latest expansion standard used in micro and laptop users. PCIe also supports latest sound cards, TV tuners, cards, and fireworks. Means overall, if we conclude, the PCI and PCIe, PCIe is the latest version of PCI, and it gives more features for the system connection of different peripheral devices. Here is AGP. AGP is the slot which was specifically designed to deal with graphic adapters. And it stands for accelerated graphic ports. Older PCs may support this expansion slot, but best video cards use PCIe. Means AGP and PCI is now replaced with PCIe. Clear? New systems are mostly using PCIe slots. Although both are in use, AGP and PCIe, but majorly new systems are having the PCIe slots. So up till now, we have discussed about the motherboard components. Motherboard is the main circuit board on which different types of internal components are present. Their interconnection ports or interfaces are present, in which we have studied about the BIOS and then the ports that we have discussed. Ports are external interfaces, which gives the point to connect your computer with external devices. These are present at the backside of your system unit, and these include the serial, parallel, PS2, VGA port, USB, Ethernet LAN ports, and audio ports, whereas the last topic was expansion slots, which are the internal interfaces which give the internal interconnection point to connect the internal components of computer components, peripherals, to enhance the feature or capability of the computer system, which include different types of slots. These may be AGP, PCI, PCIe. AGP is the accelerated graphic board, which has high speed point-to-point channel pathway, and it was primarily used for 3D computer graphics. Afterwards, next was the PCI, peripheral computer component interconnect, and it was a computer bus electronic pathway on which the hardware devices are connected with the computer. And after this type of PCI is used to connect the PCI cards in the computers, which may include the network cards, sound cards, modems, extra ports like USB or serial ports are also included inside the peripheral interconnect, component interconnect, and this is replaced with PCIe, peripheral component interconnect express, which is developed by Intel, Dell, and IBM and HP computers in 2004 to replace the old PCI and AGP standards. PCIe gives more features over the PCI and AGP ports. So this was all about today's point lecture. Hopefully you have noted down your all the lecture points, and during that discussion, if you have any question, you can ask. Next class, we will have written test from the current unit, and topics included are 4.1 to 4.1.3, part B, and under part B, we have covered 1 to 3. So these are all included in your test. Hopefully you will prepare your test. But before that, if you have any question, you can